This week we're taking a look behind the scenes at my short film, Remain. So with everything that's been going on recently, especially being on lockdown, I wanted to make the most of the opportunity I have with all this free time to make a short film. Now I've done a few stop motion animations over this period, which I'm sure I'll link somewhere, but I haven't done any live action short films properly since I finished university in 2016. The last film I did was a film called Upshot, which was inspired by films like Snatch and Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, which incidentally was also scored by our very own Neil, so that was quite cool to kind of bring it all back. And I know I have really missed doing that. I'm mostly drawn to live action fiction. So when my brother Joel came up to me a couple of months ago and said, "Sam, I'd actually really like to make a short film," my eyes lit up, and of course I jumped straight into ideas and started coming up with a few storylines. So the original idea for this was actually going to be a lot more paranormal based. I wanted to do something a bit kind of like Blair Witch, Conjuring, Paranormal Activity, that sort of thing. However, I have been looking at things about Blender 3D recently, and I am always interested in doing sci-fi things, and I'd followed a few tutorials recently and discovered that actually I might be able to do something a bit more sci-fi based rather than horror. As far as the visual effects side of things go, I've been mostly inspired by a YouTuber called Ian Hubert, who does these incredible Blender 3D tutorials, and the new version of Blender, I think it's 2.8, is exceptionally good, especially considering it's open source and in a lot of ways can even rival some of the high-end programs like Maya and 3ds Max. That was the first thing that made me go, I might be able to do this. As far as inspiration for what we ended up doing, I've been very inspired by The Mandalorian, which I just think is fantastic. Also heavily inspired by Neil Blomkamp's films, especially District 9 and Elysium. Those kind of formed the basis for the influence of what we were trying to do, albeit on a much smaller scale. Before I did anything else, I needed to make sure I could do the visual effects that I had planned to do. And this involved doing some tests. So the first test I did was just out on a walk. I just took my phone out and just sort of did a basic sort of pan up with my camera and then tracked in sort of an image of a spaceship, and sure enough it looked pretty good, and that was enough for me to go, I think we can do this. So as soon as that was done, I then moved on to coming up with some basic storyline ideas and also doing some location scouting. We've got a number of awesome fields and locations just around my house, which I knew would make a good backdrop for what we were doing. At the time there weren't a lot of people around, so I thought I could do something that looked kind of desolate without having to worry about painting out loads of people in After Effects. And yeah, we just basically explored the whole area, and I kind of pinpointed places that I thought would look good, where I could do visual effects, where we could film kind of comfortably without having to worry about being interrupted. So once we had selected the locations, I actually properly started putting a script together. Now the reason that I waited until I had the locations is because I knew that the script and the way we were going to do it was going to be dictated by where we could film and what we could film. So I based it around that, and what we did right, I kind of left loose enough that we could improvise, because I didn't want to be tied down to a very specific shot list. I just wanted kind of a guideline. We decided to hide the face of our character, much like they do in The Mandalorian. We didn't want anything to detract from kind of the escapism and take you out of the film. So the costume is essentially a two-piece mask, which is some airsoft goggles and a mask, and then we wore a coronavirus mask underneath to hide his mouth. The rest of it's just a hoodie, some steel-toe cap boots, and a few other bits and bobs, including an axe which we bought because getting hold of prop guns is quite difficult, and in England you have to really be careful, and we felt the axe in a lot of ways was going to be safer. Also, part of the reason for having the axe instead of the gun is I didn't want him to seem like he was a trained military character. I wanted it to seem like he kind of knew what he was doing, but not to a point where he was like some kind of mercenary or some kind of black ops character. So then it was time to start production. Now of course we used my trusty GH5. I love filming on this camera. I know the ins and outs. I know what works with it, what doesn't, you know, where you can kind of get away with certain situations, where you can't. Now I know the GH5 is not necessarily known for being super cinematic. There's a lot of complaints about Micro Four Thirds as opposed to Super 35, APS-C or full frame, but that's actually not necessarily true. You can get film-like and cinematic images from it if you work with it and work with its flaws. So I have discovered that using certain kinds of lenses seems to do better because it has a lot of internal sharpening. Even if you turn it down, the sharpening is a bit much. So I ended up using my trusty vintage lenses and a focal reducer to give it that Super 35 look, and that is it. So I treated the vintage lenses like I would proper cine lenses. So I had sort of 4 or 5 different focal lengths which I used. I switched between a 24, a 35, a 50 and a 135, which gave me all the range I needed. And I also used a variable ND and some step rings to make sure I could keep the good old 180-degree shutter, because I'm not a fan of cranking the shutter. I think it looks horrendous. The only reason I'd ever do it is for specific action sequences, or if actually there was a technical reason why I needed to do that. But during the lockdown period, we had loads of sunshine, it had been incredible weather, and then of course as soon as we wanted to shoot, the rain came. So we weren't able to shoot on the day we wanted, and we had to wait and keep an eye on the forecast to see if we could shoot another day. Luckily that did come up, but it was still limited. The first day we had planned to shoot, we went out to the first location and discovered there were loads of people, absolutely loads. Now I had gone out previously about a week before to shoot some establishers and I had no issues, but then on the day when we were actually shooting Joel in full costume, we managed to get I think 2 shots, and then there was just too many people. We ran into people that I haven't seen in ages. It was really weird. So then we had to wait again until another day and actually shoot earlier in the day to try and avoid, you know, the mass amount of people going on kind of lockdown walks just in the local area. Day 2, there were some specific shots I wanted to get, and the goal was to shoot as much as we can, but not rush it. So we shot for the first part in the morning. I made sure I got all the shots where I needed VFX done, and then any other shot where we wanted to spend a bit more time in it, I made sure we didn't focus so much on the sky because it did start to cloud over. Gotta do it. Well, it's fine. We'll just come down here and actually figure out a shot. So I was going to do the tooth and the tree scene. So come up like that. Ah, look, perfect, there we go. Okay, walk out of frame. Cool, okay, that actually looked really good. That looked good, I'm happy with that. What we do need to do is a really close-up shot of just you holding it in your hand there, so I can cut that in. Okay. So if you just go and pick it up, and then actually if you hold it kind of up to the camera for me a second. It's going to be like, so I did it like this. Yeah, so we'll just, I mean, it can just go on for longer, can't it? So. Once we got all those first bits, we then stopped for lunch, and then afterwards decided that we were going to at least try and shoot all the forest scenes. And sure enough, just through kind of being efficient with it, we managed to get them all done. Okay, and go. Yeah, I'm thinking that actually. Why don't I? So you come through. You can come through from there, and I'll kind of. Okay, yeah. So you're coming through from that one, and you're going to come in and inspect it. Once you've inspected, that's when you start hearing creatures. Okay, do it once more. Just need to get the focus right. Okay. All right. Okay. So go from you've got the axe and then you're turning around and stuff. Okay. Right. And take it back and then action. Right. Turn around. Turn around. Hold the axe right up. Right up. 2, 1, and running. Go. Focus right on it. Yeah, I'm going to, right. And go. Okay, stop. No, you're not going to continue on. This is where you're going to get attacked. Okay. So do that once more. Do that once more. I just need to... Okay, go for it. And looking all around. They're coming from all around. So you're going to be stood there. I'm going to get a real close-up one. So you stand, yeah, like that, and then you'll look. and you'll turn just off towards camera, and get one shot of you kind of holding the axe. So just sort of holding the axe kind of like ready. We had a rough idea of what we wanted to do, but Joel was coming up with ideas on the spot, so was I, and we ended up crafting something that kind of flowed pretty well, and we were able to be creative, but also not make something that was completely incoherent. So production went pretty well, and I think a big part of that was down to the fact that we just had a super simple crew. You know, I didn't, in the evening or in the afternoon when we went back, all I used was the camera and lenses. I didn't even have a tripod at that point. I didn't see the point in using a gimbal because the stabilization on the GH5 is amazing. And I think just having that run and gun set up with literally me and Joel and no one else, I think that did us a huge favor. Once we'd shot everything and I'd gone through the footage to make sure we didn't need to reshoot anything, it was then on to post-production, which was by far the biggest job and the hardest job. So I'd already kind of partly put the footage together and I just had to assemble the rest and make a picture cut. Once that was all done, it was then time to move on to VFX. Now I had spent a little while trying to relearn Blender and get things looking a bit more than just, you know, random images I pulled off stock sites. I wanted to actually kind of do things properly. But the first thing I needed to do was actually the signpost shot. Now I had envisioned it to kind of start out almost as if it's just this sort of kind of drama, maybe set in sort of Midwestern or just somewhere not necessarily English, but just somewhere, you know, you're not quite sure what's going on. And I want to slowly reveal stuff, like you have the creature sounds that come in, and then I wanted to have this signpost that just says something like, you know, remain on planet, you know, or die or something. And this was just created by getting an actual backplate shot of a real sign, and then I then had to mask out that and then put in my own sign and then add weathering and that sort of thing. And I think what sold that was the movement. I think if it had just been a static shot, you might have gone, oh, not sure, but actually I think the movement of it really kind of solidifies it. So next up was the space station shots. The first one was the big reveal. So this is literally just a 2D image, but it's one that I've rendered in Blender. Now I didn't want to do too much 3D tracking in Blender because I much prefer doing everything in After Effects because I'm a lot more confident with the program, and I way prefer the way it motion tracks because it's just a lot more straightforward. So what I did is I matched the lighting on the space station, and then I just had to reposition the image and do a few things like some sky replacement so I didn't have to mask out as much, and then just sort of position it and then add things like opacity and that sort of thing, and try and make it look as real as I could. The next shot was the biggest of the film. So we had done this really cool pan-up shot, and again it was going to show the space station, but I felt it was kind of looking, it was a bit too reminiscent of that first shot. So I wanted to have another ship fly over. I wanted to make it seem like there are still people on the planet, but they are all trying to escape. The first attempt just involved a single video plate created in Blender with no shadow or anything. It was just a ship flying over, and I didn't have any perspective change. So my plan was to basically motion track this video element, 2D video element, to the camera movement. That looked awful. I can safely say if you're going to try and do something like that, you can't have perspective changes. It needs to be kind of static. Maybe the camera's a bit handheld, but you actually, yeah, it doesn't work that way, trust me. So I ended up having to use in Hubert's tutorial to actually motion track in Blender to get the ship fly over and to also get the shadow. Now to get the shadow I actually had to model the field that he was in, including the hedgerow as well, to get the shadow to go across, because it just didn't look right without the shadow. So I finally managed to do that. Rendering took so long, I don't know why. Cycles is a very slow render, and I couldn't get the Eevee renderer. I know that's a game engine renderer, but I couldn't get it to do what I wanted, so I had to use Cycles. But after numerous attempts and trying to reposition things and sort of composite it correctly, I finally managed to get the shot going, and I'm really happy with how it looks. The only thing I don't like is the way it's been keyframed. I only figured out after I'd rendered it how to adjust the speed of the keyframes and the ease in, ease out. Lesson learned for next time. Hopefully it's not too obvious, but it was a bit infuriating. So there are a couple more VFX shots I had to do, aside from some cleanup shots, which was mostly just masking myself out of the reflection in the actual goggles of Joel's character. So the two VFX shots, one was one final shot of the space station, which was a telephoto shot, and I actually managed to reuse the original ship flyover element because it was there was no camera movement in the video. So I was able to reuse that and just add a little bit of extra something to it. And then the last one was one that I don't know if everyone saw. So I wanted to have, well, it's actually Joel's idea was to have a footprint in the mud. And we'd initially tried to draw it and it looked awful. And so you just don't see that. But in the end, what I had to do was trace the shape of a footprint and then take sort of the same mud element and kind of move it around a bit and sort of smudge it and darken it to make it look like a footprint. And actually that effect worked way better than I expected. There's still things I could have improved on, but I think again the motion tracking in After Effects is that good that it really sells the effect a lot better than if it had just been like static or something. So with all the VFX done, it was then time to move on to sound and music. Now I was really fortunate that a lot of the on-set sound we'd captured was actually quite usable, aside from a few bits. But I was also able to reuse elements from other shots to kind of create a Foley mix. I wanted to really make it seem like the country we were in wasn't necessarily England, maybe somewhere more Mediterranean or maybe even somewhere in America. I didn't want to be too specific on where we were, but I did want it to make it seem like it's quite warm at the time, possibly due to atmosphere changes. So I added the sound of things like crickets and cicadas, and I wanted, apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I also wanted to add things like, you know, flies and that sort of thing, and just accentuate a few sounds and then just kind of create kind of an ambient mix. There's also another moment in the film, which I don't know if how many people saw, when Joel's character is in the forest and he's looking at this this structure that he's come across. There is a moment where all the sound of the birds just dies down and it's just wind in the trees. And that was an idea from my good friend Gareth, otherwise known as Spogastu or GP Film. It was an idea that he came up with, and I gotta say, it worked great. I don't know how many people noticed it, but I sure did, because I did it, and I think it works pretty well. So once we had all the ambient and Foley stuff, the next thing was creature sound design, and this is where Neil came in. So I'm not going to say specifically what we used for it, but it was same sort of technique as they've used in a lot of other films. It was a mixture of existing animal sounds that have been kind of layered up. We've adjusted things like pitch and EQ and speed and all that sort of thing just to create some new sound. Now, even though you never see the creatures, we still created character profiles for them, and they are mostly inspired by the future predator from a British TV show called Primeval, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Also the creatures from A Quiet Place and The Last of Us as well. They're kind of sort of four-legged, they're kind of more, they're not got such good vision, but they kind of you know, locate things through more like sonar, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the kind of sound we wanted just to create. But we wanted something a little bit different, a little bit kind of unusual, rather than kind of what's almost become kind of the standard trope of sort of alien creatures on a planet. And then the final job for sound was, of course, the music. Now, I didn't want the music to overpower anything, but I needed it to be present for a few scenes. I didn't want to create your typical kind of sci-fi sounds, which are just kind of, you know, intense synth and nothing else. I wanted to kind of mix that kind of Western style, again, taking inspiration from the Mandalorian soundtrack, and mix that with the kind of 80s style Blade Runner sounds, and kind of just combine the two, because it's almost supposed to be kind of a sci-fi Western in its own right. I created just some basic guitar parts that Neil was then able to layer up and actually create a score from. And we just wanted a few sort of, probably about 3 or 4 little sort of sections of music, but then sort of, you know, a lot of time when it's just silence and things are building up. But yeah, and the final result of the music, it's had a lot of good response, because it wasn't overpowering, it was different. We wanted it to be different but still recognisable as sci-fi, which I think we achieved. There's always things you can do better, but I think Neil did a really good job of combining the Western sci-fi feel to create our score. But yeah, I wanted the film to carry itself on its own and be, you know, something that could be played without music, but I just wanted the music in there just to complement certain scenes and to kind of really kind of drive home the feeling that we're going for. And so lastly, after that, there was just a few final tweaks and of course a bit of a colour grade. Now, I wanted to make it slightly, again, a slightly warmer temperature than what we'd shot, just to make it seem like it's, you know, a hotter country. I didn't want to go too crazy on contrast and saturation. A lot of the time I'm trying to emulate the film look, which I will be doing a video on how to get, or at least my version of the film look. Not cinematic, well, it is cinematic, but it's not. It's film look, and I need to you know, there's a difference between the two. Anyway, yeah, so I wanted it to give it as close to the film look as I could. The last thing I did was to add a film grain. Now, I ended up using a 35mm film grain. It was a 4K one. Bumped up the contrast because I wanted it to look quite gritty and quite noticeable. However, I kind of wish I'd done maybe 16mm instead, just to make it almost have that kind of Walking Dead look, which I really like. But, you know, I'm still happy with how it came out. The one thing I did find is that you have to bump up the bitrate, otherwise it just makes the whole image kind of mushy. So yeah, the bitrate, I ended up using a really high bitrate to export that. I don't know how much YouTube's kind of ruined it, but hopefully hopefully not too bad. Hopefully you can see the film grain on it. But there you go, that's more or less how I made the film, and I'm really glad I managed to do something during this lockdown period, and I'd highly encourage any other filmmakers, even if it's just filming yourself, just filming something. It's during this period, even though things are starting to ease now, it's really good to keep up. And this is a perfect opportunity to do stuff creative just for yourself, not doing something that's, you know, financially focused. And I think I said this in my making of my most recent Lego film. It's just good to do stuff for the sake of being creative and not being like, I need to make money from this. So that has been quite nice. There's definitely things I wish I could have done better. There's a few kind of, you know, I wish I'd been able to expand on it a little bit more. I wish I'd been able to do a bit more world building. There's a few shots in there that I kind of don't think need to be in there. And I would have loved to have shown the creature, even just like an arm or something, but I think I kind of definitely wanted to take the Jaws approach, except I kind of took the Jaws approach and then some, because I just knew that at the present moment I can't create creature effects that look convincing, and so far everything in there was a certain standard of what was convincing, and I didn't want to hinder that. So I'm quite glad we never showed anything, even if it is a bit of a cop-out. I think it's way better to do that than to have the big reveal be just a complete, you know, joke, basically. So yeah, I'm happy I did that, but I certainly would have liked to have shown it. I've had a really great response from this film from fellow creators and fellow filmmakers, and some good feedback and criticism for next time. I'm really appreciative of some of the people who have watched it, especially people who, you know, have a bigger following. It's really appreciated. I've also got to say a big thank you to everyone who did support us in making it, whether it's people who actually worked on the film or just sort of friends, family. Big thank you to all you people, because you know, it was really encouraging, and you know, the response again has been really, you know, it's definitely made me fall in love with film again, so that's good. So before I end the video, the one person I haven't actually spoken to or had on this video yet really to interview is Joel. So Joel, what do you have to say about the film?
Yeah, it was alright, I guess.
So I hope you all enjoyed this insight into how I made this film. I know it was quite a long video. I knew it was going to be a long one. I put it off for a while because there's a lot to talk about. But I hope you all enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. We've got loads of videos coming out every week. And we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Kind of... oh, Muffin, shut up. Shut up! Muffin!